A ruthless gangster dies saving a bullied kid, then wakes up trapped inside his body. Now he is stuck living life as a high schooler, while his old body is already gone. But his gangster instincts? Still fully loaded, and now his new life is about to go completely off the rails. This looks like an ordinary study room with a student desperately trying to finish a test before time runs out, while the teacher keeps breathing down his neck. But then the study room door suddenly swings open. A gang is standing outside. It becomes clear this isn't an average student. He's actually a notorious gangster named Dukpal. After class, Dukpal meets with his gang's chairman, Chilseong, who advises him to focus on his gang. Later, Dukpal tells his associates Dong-soo and Dong-min that he'll drive off by himself. But as he's walking away from the car near a bridge, he spots a student in serious danger. Without thinking twice, Dukpal rushes over to help. The student falls onto Dukpal, sending both of them tumbling down, and before Dukpal can even react, a vehicle crashes into him and drives away. The scene then shifts to the hospital. Dukpal finally wakes up, but when he looks in the mirror, he nearly loses it. He's no longer in his own body. He's now trapped inside the body of the student he tried to save. Things get even crazier when Dukpal's associates, Dong-soo and Dong-min, find him and start beating him, blaming him for their boss's death. That's when Dukpal realizes the truth. His soul has somehow switched bodies with the student Lee Hyun. Desperate to get his old body back, Dukpal tries everything he can think of, even attempting to repeat what happened at the bridge, but it doesn't work. Instead, he ends up with a badly injured foot. While recovering, Dukpal reads Lee Hyun's diary and finally discovers what pushed the kid to the edge. A group of students had been relentlessly bullying him at school. The harassment had gotten so bad that he eventually gave up. Now, Dukpal has had enough. He decides to disguise himself as Lee Hyun and clean up the mess these bullies left behind. When he visits Lee Hyun's house, he learns another shocking secret. He is actually the illegitimate son of the CEO of OK Chairman's company, and his mother has been manipulated into becoming an alcoholic by the secretary. The next day, he gets a fresh haircut and heads out to buy some books. That's where he runs into his classmate Ji-woo. Dukpal doesn't recognize him at first, but Ji-woo helps him pick out his books. However, Ji-woo is completely thrown off by the way Lee Hyun suddenly talks. He sounds less like a teenager and more like a straight-up middle-aged uncle. As time passes, his injured foot finally heals. He starts hitting the gym, studying like crazy, and completely transforming Lee Hyun's life. When he returns to school, he politely greets his teacher at the entrance. The teacher is impressed by the sudden change and even praises him in front of the bullying group, telling them to learn something from him. His classmates barely recognize him after the haircut and personality change. But after class, the bullying group headed by Jae-min comes looking for trouble again. This time, he refuses to back down. He fights back, but quickly realizes there's one major problem. His gangster instincts are still there, but this body is way too weak to back them up. While unconscious, Dukpal has a strange dream. Lee Hyun's soul appears and begs him not to damage his body, warning him that if his body is seriously harmed, Lee Hyun could die. He also admits that he feels his own life is completely worthless. When Lee Hyun wakes up, Ji-woo offers to help and takes him to the school clinic, where he bandages his injuries. Then Ji-woo asks the question that's been bothering him. Why didn't Lee Hyun recognize him at the bookstore? Lee Hyun quickly claims he has amnesia, a temporary loss of memory. But Ji-woo isn't fooled. He tells him that his body may be the same, but his voice makes it obvious that someone else is inside. He warns him to stop pretending. Dukpal wants to become friends with Ji-woo, but he reminds him that the real Lee Hyun used to stalk and blackmail him, threatening to expose his true nature to everyone. He even calls Lee Hyun a stalker. Now Dukpal is confused. Why would the real Lee Hyun have treated Ji-woo like that? Meanwhile, Dukpal slowly starts making friends with his classmates and actually begins enjoying school. But Ji-woo keeps teasing and questioning him, constantly looking for proof that he's not the real Lee Hyun. Then Lee Hyun's father's secretary suddenly arrives at school with an order. Lee Hyun is being sent abroad to study, but Dukpal refuses. He tells her he'll decide his own future or she'll have to deal with the consequences. That night, Ji-woo helps him with math, but even while studying, Ji-woo keeps pushing. He asks Dukpal one simple question: what's your real name? Meanwhile, Dukpal visits a gangster bathhouse and runs into two members of a new gang. Instead of being intimidated, he tears into them for their terrible manners and starts teaching them what being a real gangster actually means. Elsewhere, Jae-min and his group are dreaming about becoming gangsters. That's when members of the Chilseong gang suddenly appear. The two gangsters tell them about a kid who claimed to be Dukpal, but Dong-soo immediately shuts them down. Dukpal is dead. Then Jae-min notices Lee Hyun leaving the area, and suddenly things start getting suspicious. Later, Ji-woo visits Lee Hyun's house pretending he came to help him study. But that's not his real reason for being there. He's secretly searching the room for clues that the real Lee Hyun is gone. Then he catches him. Ji-woo challenges him to prove that he's really Lee Hyun. But before he can answer, his mother suddenly panics. He tries to calm her down. While Ji-woo watches, he secretly pulls a strand of hair from Lee Hyun's hood. Later, the two go outside for some fresh air, but Ji-woo still isn't satisfied. He asks one final question. Is Lee Hyun dead? Dukpal calmly tells him that he can have that strand of hair tested and finally discover the truth. When Ji-woo gets home, his father is furious that he stayed out late and went around without permission. Then he reveals something even more disturbing. There's a location tracker on Ji-woo's phone. The next day, the bullies approach Dukpal and show him a video of what they did to the real Lee Hyun. They laugh while watching him suffer, but this time, Dukpal snaps. He grabs the phone and crushes it with his bare hands. Then he turns on the bullies. A fight breaks out, and Dukpal completely overwhelms them. Jae-min is stunned. He looks at him and asks, "Are you a gangster?" Dukpal looks him straight in the eye and finally stops pretending. "You guessed right. I'm Dukpal from the Chilsong gang." The teacher asked Ji-woo why he never reported the students who had been bullying Lee Hyun. Ji-woo simply pointed toward the window. Outside, Dukpal was beating Jae-min. The teacher immediately ordered him to let Jae-min go and wait for her. But the moment Ji-woo saw him, he was hit by a painful memory. He had once watched Lee Hyun being bullied and did absolutely nothing. The teacher went downstairs and tore into the bullies, blaming them for pushing Lee Hyun this far. She took Dukpal to the office, and finally Dukpal discovered why Lee Hyun had never contacted the school's violence committee. He couldn't bring his parents to school, but now he had another problem. He had no idea what major Lee Hyun wanted to study, which university he planned to attend, or what he was supposed to write on his career counseling form. The next day, Dukpal shocked everyone by grabbing Jae-min by the collar and warning him not to cause any more trouble in class. Meanwhile, Ji-woo was desperately waiting for the DNA test results. He needed to know the truth. Then Jae-min revealed something that made Dukpal even more confused. Ji-woo had reported the bullying, but Lee Hyun was the one who told that they were just messing around. So if this guy really was Lee Hyun, why had he threatened Ji-woo by saying he'd expose his true nature? And why did he keep insisting that he wanted to be his friend? Then Dukpal studied as hard as he could and still failed his math exam. So he swallowed his pride and begged Ji-woo for help. At the same time, two students led by Seok asked Ji-woo to join their study group. Seok is the guy hired by Ji-woo's father to keep an eye on him. Ji-woo clearly wanted to refuse, but he couldn't say no. Dukpal noticed that he was under pressure, so he decided to help him. Soon, everyone headed to the playground. Dukpal was about to face Seok and his two friends in a basketball match, but just before the game started, Ji-woo got a phone call. The DNA results were finally in. The test was a perfect match. There was no mistake. The person in front of him really was Lee Hyun. Meanwhile, Dukpal completely destroyed the three students on the basketball court. Afterward, Ji-woo began helping him study. But during one of their conversations, Dukpal asked him a strange question. What was the right way to deal with bullies? Ji-woo casually answered, "Kill them." He explained that the victims shouldn't be the ones dying. The people responsible should be the ones punished instead. That answer immediately made Dukpal suspicious of him. The next day, the whole school was still talking about Dukpal's basketball victory, but Ji-woo knew something Dukpal didn't. Lee Hyun was deathly allergic to pineapple, so when Ji-woo saw him about to eat something containing pineapple, he quickly knocked it away. But Dukpal didn't know about the allergy and had already eaten a piece of pineapple jelly. Within moments, he suffered a severe allergic reaction and could barely breathe. At the hospital, Ji-woo finally snapped, "You're not Lee Hyun." Then Ji-woo confessed the truth. Lee Hyun had begged him for help before, but Ji-woo had treated him coldly and cruelly. Ever since then, the guilt had kept him from sleeping properly. Finally, Dukpal, still trapped inside Lee Hyun's body, revealed the truth. The real Lee Hyun would eventually return, but until then, Dukpal needed help. He asked Ji-woo to improve Lee Hyun's grades and help make his life better. Ji-woo agreed. He created a strict study schedule and started helping Dukpal catch up with schoolwork. Meanwhile, Jae-min's group went to meet the head of the Chilsong gang. They wanted to know whether anyone had learned fighting from Dukpal. Instead, they got seriously chewed out. Later, Dukpal was walking home with Ji-woo when Ji-woo suddenly spotted something terrifying. A masked man was kidnapping his mother. Dukpal immediately chased after the kidnappers while Ji-woo rushed to save her. Jae-min had been ordered to guard the kidnapped woman, but the moment things got dangerous, he panicked and ran away. In the end, Ji-woo and Dukpal managed to save her, but one question remained. Who were those masked men, and why were they after Ji-woo's mother? The police arrived at the hospital to investigate the attack, but Dukpal already knew who was behind it. Lee Gyeon, chairman's secretary. Still, he told the police it was nothing more than a dispute with some neighbors over over a parking spot. Ji-woo couldn't understand why he refused to report the attack. Dukpal simply explained that involving the police would only make things harder. Then things got even worse. Ji-woo's father, who had already tracked down his location, showed up at the scene and immediately started tearing into him. Under the pressure from his father, Ji-woo suffered a panic attack and eventually passed out. Meanwhile, Dukpal tried to contact Lee Jian, but he couldn't find her number anywhere. Even the maid she had paid didn't have it. A few miles away, Lee Gian was furious with the Chilseong gang for failing to kidnap a single woman. Back at school, Dukpal's classmates were impressed by the way he stood up for himself. Before long, they started treating him like a friend, and his relationship with Ji-woo was changing too. Dukpal genuinely began caring about him and even started teaching him boxing. But while their friendship grew stronger, Ji-woo's father was quietly digging into Lee Hyun's new identity. He checked Lee Hyun's academic records and started investigating exactly who this student really was. Then something unexpected happened. Jae-min spotted Dukpal at the same place where he and the gang had previously tried to kidnap a woman. But instead of confronting him, Dukpal brought Jae-min inside and offered him something to eat. Then Jae-min made an even stranger request. He asked if he could stay the night. Dukpal was completely caught off guard. Later, Ji-woo got into a heated argument with Jae-min. He confronted him about his connection to the gang and revealed that he knew exactly why Jae-min had been there. He was helping the gang in kidnapping. Now, he was only checking whether the police were still investigating the case. Just then, Dukpal walked in and heard everything. He immediately demanded to know where the gang was hiding. The next day after school, Dukpal was suddenly kidnapped by the gang. He was taken to their hideout. Then the gang's leader finally stepped forward. Dukpal froze. This wasn't some stranger. This was someone from his old life. It was Dong-soo, his former assistant from the Chilseong gang. When Ji-woo saw Dukpal being kidnapped, he immediately called the police. But moments later, he canceled the report. He was afraid that involving the police would only put Dukpal in even more danger. Meanwhile, Dukpal fought back against the gang until Dong-min finally knocked him unconscious. As Ji-woo desperately searched for him, Jae-min suddenly pulled him away and hit him. Jae-min explained that his own friends were looking for him and wanted to drag him back into the gang. Then he told Ji-woo where they might have taken Dukpal. Ji-woo didn't waste a second. He jumped into a taxi and rushed there. For the first time, he even ignored his father's messages. He also arranged extra security around Lee Hyun's mother. Meanwhile, Dukpal confronted Dong-soo. He accused him of taking advantage of Dukpal's death and using the Chilseong gang for his own purposes. But Dong-soo refused to back down. He threatened Dukpal, warning that if he didn't cooperate, Lee Hyun's mother would be kidnapped the very next morning. Then the story reveals what Dukpal doesn't know. In a flashback, we see Dong-soo secretly working with Lee Gyeon. Their plan was to send Lee Hyun's mother to a mental hospital, send Lee Hyun overseas, and eventually kill him. Meanwhile, Ji-woo's father tracked him down outside a hotel. Ji-woo begged his father to help save his friend. Inside the hotel, Dukpal suddenly turned the tables on Dong-soo. He revealed that he knew all of Dong-soo's weaknesses and threatened to break his already injured legs unless Dong-soo gave him Lee Jaeon's location. Dong-soo was stunned. How could he possibly know so much about him? When Dukpal walked out of the hotel, he thanked Ji-woo's father, who was a prosecutor, for showing up. The prosecutor then went inside and warned Dong-soo to stay away from Dukpal. Otherwise, he would charge him with corruption. With no other choice, Dong-soo ordered his men to pull back from Lee Hyun's house. But then, Lee Jaeon confronted Dong-soo. She demanded to know why he still hadn't kidnapped Lee Hyun's mother and reminded him about their deal. Another flashback revealed the reason behind their arrangement. Lee Jaeon had offered Dong-soo money because Chilseong gang's chairman needed surgery, and Dong-soo couldn't afford to pay for it. Now Lee Gyeon was using that debt to control him. With no way out, Dong-soo decided to secretly follow Dukpal and keep watching him. Meanwhile, Dukpal texted Ji-woo, but there was no reply. Ji-woo didn't even show up at the study room. When Dukpal finally found him, Ji-woo explained that his father had forbidden him from seeing Dukpal, talking to him, or even returning to the study room. But despite his father's warning, Ji-woo still wanted to help Dukpal uncover the truth about the real Lee Hyun. Later, Dukpal caught a group of students smoking. He took their cigarettes away, scolded them for being late, and asked if they knew where Jae-min was, but none of them knew. The next day, another student told Dukpal that Jae-min was working at a convenience store, so he went to find him. Jae-min admitted that the gang was after him and said he wanted to quit school. Then Dukpal suddenly received a phone call. He immediately rushed to a bridge, and that's where he found Ji-woo. He was standing at the exact same bridge where the real Lee Hyun had once jumped. Dukpal immediately realized something was wrong. Ji-woo looked completely overwhelmed, so instead of leaving him alone, he stayed by his side. He took Ji-woo to the beach, hoping to help him clear his mind and for once, simply put a smile back on his face. While traveling by train with Ji-woo, Dukpal noticed something disturbing. Dong-soo's gang was on the same train, and they weren't following them by coincidence. coincidence. Even after Dukpal and Jiwoo got off and went shopping, the gang continued following them. But despite being watched, the two still managed to have a great time. Later, they checked into a small local hotel. It was the same hotel where he used to stay back when he was living as Dukpal. The moment Dong-soo realized this, his suspicions grew even stronger. That night, Jiwoo finally opened up. He admitted how much pressure he was under because of his father and confessed that he desperately wanted to get away from him. The next morning, Dukpal called Dong-min, but the moment Dong-min heard Dukpal's voice coming from phone call, he was stunned. He and the others immediately went to meet him. Dukpal told them everything about their past, hoping they would finally realize who he really was, but they came to a completely different conclusion. They thought he was Dukpal's son. Believing Lee Hyun was the son of their former boss, they decided to protect him whenever he was in trouble. Dong-soo even promised to keep an eye on Lee Gyeon for him. Back at school, Jiwoo's father confronted Dukpal. He blamed him for distracting his son and even threatened to report him to the school's violence committee. But the pressure became too much for Jiwoo. He suddenly became dizzy and nearly collapsed. That's when Dukpal finally lost his patience. He confronted Jiwoo's father and blamed his parenting for destroying his son's mental state. Meanwhile, Jae-min's group received some bad news. They had discovered that Lee Hyun was connected to gangsters, and because Lee Hyun had contacted the gang, they no longer wanted anything to do with Jae-min. Back at home, Lee Hyun's mother suffered another panic attack. Dukpal calmed her down and took her medication to the pharmacy, but there he discovered something disturbing. The medication could become addictive and potentially cause brain damage. Dukpal immediately contacted Dong-soo and told him what he discovered. Then he gave them an order: find Lee Gyeon and bring her to me. At the same time, Lee Gyeon approached the gang and pressured them into working for her. She reminded them that they owed her a favor, but Dong-soo refused to back down. He told her they were now protecting Dukpal's son, Lee Hyun. If she wanted them on her side, she could go to Lee Hyun herself and apologize. Frustrated that the gang wouldn't cooperate, Lee Gyeon suddenly noticed Jae-min's group talking about Lee Hyun, and she saw an opportunity. She approached Jae-min's group and began planning something new with them. The next day, the entire school was buzzing over a shocking complaint. Someone had accused Lee Hyun of bullying, harassing, and tormenting several students, including Jiwoo. Jiwoo's father was furious. He declared that if the school couldn't handle the situation, he would take the matter to court. Then things got even worse. The same students who had bullied the real Lee Hyun went to the police and filed complaints against him, and this time, Lee Gyeon was backing them. Dukpal was suddenly facing accusations from every direction. While he was at school, he received a phone call telling him to come to the parking lot, but things were about to get more worse. She turned her attention to Dukpal and blackmailed him. She threatened to send him to juvenile detention and even have his mother kidnapped unless he left the country. The next day at school, Jiwoo learned that he would be placed in Seok's class, but because the school considered Jiwoo the victim and Dukpal the aggressor, they couldn't be placed in the same class. Now everyone in the classroom was looking at Dukpal differently, but his friends didn't abandon him, neither did Jiwoo. They continued treating him normally, making it clear they still had his back. Then Jae-min joined Dukpal and Jiwoo and gave them the address of his former bullying group, but the bullies weren't about to let Jae-min walk away that easily. They threatened to expose Jae-min as the one who had actually led their group, unless he filed a complaint against Dukpal. Now Dukpal and the gang came up with a plan. They would expose Lee Jae-yeon's true face in front of chairman. Dukpal also entrusted his mother's protection to the gang, so he could focus completely on his upcoming midterms. Then Jiwoo dropped another bombshell. He revealed that he had canceled the bullying complaint his father had filed with the school's violence committee. Meanwhile, Dong-soo's gang reported that they still couldn't find Lee Gyeon or chairman at their office, but they refused to give up. They kept searching, determined to stop Dukpal from being sent to juvenile detention. Back at school, everyone was stunned when they saw Dukpal's surprisingly high grades. But the trouble was far from over. The police informed Dukpal that someone powerful was pressuring the prosecution to wrap up his case as quickly as possible. Then Jiwoo got into an argument with his father. His father revealed that he'd already sent the case to the prosecution. He threatened to send Dukpal to juvenile detention and warned Jiwoo not to testify for him. Now Dukpal was seriously worried. He had no idea who was behind the pressure on the prosecution or what they were planning. Meanwhile, Jiwoo tried convincing Jae-min to recover the videos of Lee Hyun being bullied. The footage was still saved on his friends' phones. If they could get those videos back, they could finally expose who the real bullies were, but Jae-min refused. Later that night, Jae-min finally broke down. He apologized for refusing to become a witness, but instead of judging him, Dukpal simply gave him some food. Then he told Jae-min to save his apology for the real Lee Hyun when he came back. He also told him to change his ways and become a better person. Those words clearly hit Jae-min hard. Afterward, he was left crying, overwhelmed by regret for everything he'd done to Lee Hyun. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dukpal woke up to find Lee Hyun's mother doing much better. She finally told him about Lee Jian and gave him the address of her apartment. The moment Dukpal got the information, he sent Dong-soo and his men straight there. Meanwhile, Jae-min prepared breakfast for his sister, and this time he finally made a decision. He was done running from his mistakes. Then the scene shifted to the prosecution office. The bullying group was already there facing Dukpal and Jiwoo. Jiwoo's father tried to pull his son out of the situation, but before he could, the door opened. Jae-min walked into the prosecution office with a firm decision. At the hospital, when Lee Hyun's mother woke up, boss Chil-seong was there waiting for her. He scolded her for letting things get this bad and for everything her son had been going through. But despite everything, Dukpal stayed by her side and continued taking care of her. Then Chil-seong introduced himself as Lee Hyun's uncle, the brother of Dukpal. Meanwhile, back at the prosecution office, Jae-min stole the tablet belonging to the bullying group and handed it to Dukpal. The students immediately started fighting with each other, and when Jiwoo caught a bully, he lost his temper and punched him. Security rushed in. That's when Dukpal handed over the video evidence. The footage exposed what had really happened to Lee Hyun. Jae-min stepped up. He became a witness for Lee Hyun and told the truth about everything. Dukpal tried to stop him because despite everything Jae-min had done, he still cared about what would happen to him. But it was too late. The police arrested the bullies and took them away. As Jae-min was being taken away in a police van, he suddenly spotted someone outside, the real Lee Hyun. For the first time, Jae-min was standing face to face with the person he'd bullied. He apologized to him, finally confronting the damage he'd caused. Meanwhile, Jiwoo asked his father to apologize to Lee Hyun, but his father furiously warned him that if he continued acting this way, he would have to transfer to another school. Jiwoo refused. He wasn't going anywhere. Later, Dukpal met with boss Chil-seong and asked why he had shut down the gang. Chil-seong explained that the gang had run so efficiently because of the Dukpal. Then Chil-seong looked closely at Lee Hyun. He didn't look anything like Dukpal's son. And that's when Dukpal realized. Chil-seong already knew the truth. He knew the person standing in front of him wasn't Dukpal's son. He was Dukpal. Chil-seong was devastated. After losing him once, he couldn't bear the thought of losing him again. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun's mother was discharged from the hospital and prepared to go home. Dukpal convinced her that she could start acting again. He also convinced her to separate from the chairman, reminding her that he hadn't been there when she needed him most. Then Dukpal rushed to the airport to confront the chairman, and this time he called the gang for backup. At the airport, the chairman was surrounded by his team and Lee Jian. Lee Jian tried to sneak away, but she didn't get far. Dukpal caught her and brought her straight to the chairman. Then he revealed everything. He told the chairman how Lee Jian had tried to kidnap his mother and how she had helped set up the case against him. The chairman was stunned. He had no idea what she had been doing behind his back. Later, Dukpal told Dong-soo that he would go home by himself. Those simple words triggered a memory. Dong-soo remembered Dukpal saying the exact same thing in the past. Suddenly, everything clicked. The voice, the attitude, the way he spoke. Dong-soo finally realized the impossible truth. Lee Hyun was Dukpal. As Dukpal walked away, he suddenly saw the soul of the real Lee Hyun. He asked him how it felt to finally return and experience everything Dukpal had done to protect his life. Dukpal gave him one final piece of advice: focus on school, live your life properly. Meanwhile, Seok apologized for spreading the rumors accusing Lee Hyun of bullying. He even offered to become friends with Dukpal, but Dukpal turned him down, saying Seok's vibe didn't really match with him. Meanwhile, Jiwoo started working a part-time job because he wanted to become financially independent. Then Seok showed up. He apologized to Jiwoo and asked if they could become friends. He also told Jiwoo that Dukpal was leaving and that he had asked him to take care of Jiwoo. Jiwoo immediately rushed to find him. When he caught up with him, he asked the question he had been afraid to ask. Is the real Lee Hyun back? Dukpal told him the truth. His original body had died, and his soul had ended up inside Lee Hyun's body. Now the real Lee Hyun's soul had returned. But then Dukpal realized something. Just like Jae-min, Jiwoo could see Lee Hyun's soul too. Meanwhile, Jiwoo apologized to Lee Hyun's soul. He admitted that when Lee Hyun had once begged him to ask his father for help against the bullies, Jiwoo had refused, and he had failed to help Lee Hyun when he needed someone most. But this time things were different. They had finally become true friends. Later, Dong-soo and Dong-min came to visit Dukpal, but Dong-soo already knew the truth. Dong-soo and Dukpal even got to spend time together again, just like old times. Then the story shifts back to Jiwoo. He cried as he said goodbye to Dukpal, knowing how much he would miss him. Then Lee Hyun's soul revealed something heartbreaking. He had finally reached a point where he no longer wanted to continue living this life, but he was at peace, knowing that someone else had finally found happiness while living in his body. So he asked Dukpal to keep moving forward and live the life he never thought he could have. And that's exactly what Dukpal did. Later, Ji-woo and Dukpal walked into college together, but this time, they weren't strangers. They were true friends.